She was desperate and hopeless until a divine force answered her cry in the most unexpected way. I never thought desperation could have a sound, but that night it was deafening. It was in the silence of my empty apartment, in the hollow echo of my own breathing as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills that refused to shrink no matter how much I wished them away. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second like a taunt. Midnight came and went, and still the weight in my chest didn't budge. I tried to tell myself I'd figure it out tomorrow, but that's what I said yesterday. And the day before that, tomorrow felt like a promise I couldn't keep, a lie I kept telling myself to survive another 24 hours. My son was asleep in the next room, his tiny body curled under a blanket that was a little too thin for the winter chill creeping into the apartment. I tried to turn the heat on earlier, but the radiator rattled and groaned in protest before giving up entirely. I'd thrown an extra blanket on him and prayed it would be enough. Prayed. The word felt foreign, like something from a language I'd forgotten how to speak. It wasn't that I didn't believe in something greater, more like I didn't think it believed in me. I'd stopped going to church years ago, not because I was angry or rebellious, but because life had a way of making faith feel impractical. When you're drowning, hope feels like a luxury, and I couldn't afford luxuries. That night, though, something broke in me. Maybe it was the way the bills seemed to mock me from their neat stack on the counter. Maybe it was the gnawing hunger in my stomach from skipping dinner so my son could have the last bit of pasta. Or maybe it was just exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and convinces you that you're alone in a universe too vast to care. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I did. I closed my eyes, pressed my hands to my face, and whispered into the darkness, "If there's anyone out there, please help me." It wasn't a prayer, not really. It was more like a scream from the soul, raw and desperate. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't expect anything. If I'm being honest, I wasn't even sure who or what I was talking to. God? The universe? Some abstract force I'd read about in self-help books, but never quite believed in? The silence that followed was almost mocking. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding against my ribs, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The weight in my chest didn't lift. The room didn't change. Nothing happened. And then something did. It started small, almost imperceptible, a flicker of light from the corner of the room, like the dying gasp of a candle flame. I ignored it at first, chalking it up to exhaustion. But then it happened again, brighter this time. The overhead light flickered once, twice, and then steadied, casting the room in a strange, almost otherworldly glow. I frowned, my pulse quickening. "Great," I muttered under my breath. Now the power's going out too. But the light wasn't flickering anymore. It was shifting, bending in ways that didn't make sense. Shadows danced on the walls, their movements erratic and unnatural. The air grew thick, heavy with a scent I couldn't quite place. A mix of lavender and something metallic, like the sharp tang of blood. My hands gripped the edge of the table as the room seemed to pulse around me. The silence was no longer empty. It hummed with an energy I couldn't explain, a vibration that settled deep in my chest. And then I heard it. You called. The voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room like a melody, low and resonant. It wasn't like a human voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, wrapping around me like a warm breeze. I have come. My heart felt like it might explode. I whipped my head around, searching for the source, but the room was empty. Just me and the bills and the flickering light. But the presence, I could feel it. Something was there, even if I couldn't see it. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The voice didn't answer right away. Instead, the shadows in the corner of the room began to shift, coalescing into a shape that was both there and not there. It shimmered, like heat waves rising off asphalt on a summer day, and as it moved closer, I realized it wasn't just light. It was a figure. It was vaguely human, tall and slender, but its edges were blurred, as if it couldn't decide whether to stay solid or dissolve into the ether. Light radiated from it, soft and golden, casting strange patterns on the walls. My instinct was to run, but my body refused to move. I was frozen, caught between terror and awe. "What are you?" I whispered. The figure tilted its head, a gesture that was almost curious. An answer, it said simply, "You seek hope." Hope! The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream. Instead, I shook my head, my voice barely more than a whisper. "This isn't real. You're not real." The figure stepped closer, its presence filling the room with a warmth that was almost soothing. Almost. "Reality bends to those who are desperate enough," it said, its voice soft and unyielding. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced with questions, but none of them made it past my lips. The figure didn't seem to mind. It simply stood there, waiting, as if it had all the time in the world. Finally, I found my voice. "Why me?" I asked. "Why now?" The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, it raised a hand, palm facing upward, and I saw something glowing there, a small sphere of light, swirling with colors I couldn't name. It was beautiful and terrifying, like holding a piece of the universe in the palm of your hand. "You called," it said again, its tone gentle but firm. "And I have come." I stared at the orb, my heart pounding. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. And yet the weight in my chest had shifted just slightly. The air around me buzzed with an energy I couldn't explain, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't drowning. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what this figure wanted from me, or why it had chosen to appear in my tiny, broken life. But in that moment, I didn't care, because for the first time in months, I felt something other than hopelessness. I felt seen. The figure didn't move for what felt like an eternity. It stood there, still and radiant, its edges flickering as if it were a flame caught between worlds. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A hallucination? A dream? Stress-induced madness? But no explanation could account for the weight of its presence or the warmth radiating through the room. My voice came out as a rasp. What do you want?" It tilted its head, the movement almost inquisitive. Its form shimmered, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a face. Human, familiar. But then it was gone, replaced by a swirl of light. "You called," it said, its tone as smooth and steady as a deep river. "I have come to answer." I wanted to deny it, to claim I didn't know what it was talking about, but the words caught in my throat. I had called, not in words anyone would understand, but in the raw cry of my spirit. A desperate, unguarded plea to the void. And now someone was here, answering a question I hadn't even fully formed. My fingers gripped the edge of the table. I didn't mean. I stopped myself, shaking my head. What was the point of pretending? "I don't know what I need," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." The figure moved closer, its light casting strange, rippling shadows across the walls. The air around me seemed to hum, not with sound, but with a vibration I could feel deep in my chest. "You seek hope," it said simply. Hope! The word hit me like a wave, washing over the layers of fear and exhaustion that had built up over months, years. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, to scream that hope wasn't enough to fix my life, my broken finances, my struggling health. But instead, I just whispered yes. The figure raised a hand, its fingers long and delicate, glowing faintly like embers. "Hope is not given," it said, its voice soft but firm. "It is reignited. You have the spark within you, but it lies buried. Buried under what? I asked bitterly. Debt? Exhaustion? Failure? Doubt, it replied. Fear? Pain? The burdens you carry are heavy, but they are not immovable. I let out a shaky breath, the weight of its words pressing against my chest. You make it sound so easy. It is not easy, the figure said. But it is possible. I didn't know whether to believe it. A part of me wanted to, desperately. The part of me that stayed up late, imagining a future where things weren't so hard, where my son could grow up without carrying the weight of my mistakes. But the other part, the cynical part, scoffed at the idea. What could this thing possibly do to change anything? What are you? I asked finally, my voice trembling. The figure paused as if considering the question. An answer, it said. A guide, if you will. A guide to what? To the strength you already possess, it replied. To the light within you that has been dimmed. I wanted to believe it, but doubt still gnawed at the edges of my mind. Why now? I asked. Why me? You called. It said simply, as if that explained everything. And you are ready. Ready for what? The figure stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought I felt its warmth like standing too close to a fire. Ready to reclaim your life. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Reclaim my life? Do you even know what my life looks like? I'm drowning in debt. I can barely keep the lights on, and I'm one step away from losing everything that matters. And yet, it said, its voice calm and steady, you are still here, still fighting. That is the mark of someone who has not given up. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I'm not fighting. I'm surviving. There's a difference. There is, the figure agreed. But survival is the first step. From it, strength grows, resilience, courage. You have more within you than you realize. Its words stirred something deep inside me, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, not yet, but something close. I didn't know whether to believe it, but a part of me wanted to. How do I? My voice broke, and I swallowed hard, trying again. How do I fix this? My life? Where do I even start? The figure's light seemed to pulse, a soft, rhythmic glow. Start by letting go of the weight that does not serve you, it said. The guilt, the shame, the belief that you are alone. I wanted to argue, to tell it that letting go wasn't that simple, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, I knew it was right. I did carry those things like anchors tied to my soul, and I didn't know how to let them go. The figure raised its hand again, and in its palm, a small sphere of light appeared, swirling with colors I couldn't name. It was mesmerizing, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. This is a gift, it said, a reminder of the strength within you. I stared at the orb, my heart pounding. What is it? Hope, it said simply. The spark you have forgotten. It will not solve your problems, but it will give you the clarity to face them. I hesitated, fear warring with curiosity. What's the catch? There is no catch, the figure said. Only a choice. You may accept it and move forward, or deny it and remain as you are. The decision is yours. My hands trembled as I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of the light. It was warm, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I didn't know what would happen if I accepted it, but I knew what would happen if I didn't. Nothing would change. I would stay trapped in this endless cycle, drowning in the weight of my own despair. And so, I took it. The moment my fingers closed around the orb, a rush of energy surged through me. It was like standing in a storm, the wind and rain battering me from all sides, but instead of fear, I felt alive. For the first time in years, I felt awake, as if I'd been sleepwalking through life and was finally opening my eyes. The light from the orb spread through me, filling every corner of my being. It was overwhelming and exhilarating, and for a moment, I thought I might be consumed by it. But then, just as quickly as it began, it faded, leaving behind a quiet stillness. The figure stepped back, its form shimmering faintly. "You are stronger than you know," it said. "Trust in that." Before I could respond, the light around it flared, and in an instant, it was gone, leaving me alone in the silent room. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt different, full of possibility. I sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where the figure had stood. I didn't know what had just happened or what it meant, but one thing was clear. Something had changed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the tiniest flicker of hope. The morning light streamed through the window, washing over me in soft golden hues. At first, I thought it was a dream. That glowing figure, the swirling orb of light, the overwhelming feeling of being seen. Surely, it was just my mind's way of coping with the weight of my problems. But as I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I felt different. The heaviness that had been my constant companion for months, maybe even years, was still there, but it didn't feel suffocating anymore. It was as though the figure had planted a seed inside me, something small but alive. I didn't know what to make of it. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint sound of my son's snores from the next room. The usual dread of another day weighed on me, but beneath it, there was something else. A faint flicker of possibility. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my hair. Whatever that thing was, if it was even real, it hadn't magically paid my bills or put food in the fridge. I still had to face the same mess I went to bed with. The only difference was I didn't feel as paralyzed by it. I shuffled into the kitchen, eyeing the stack of bills on the counter like an old enemy. Normally, just looking at them would make my chest tighten, but this time, I reached for them. My hands were steady as I flipped through the envelopes, sorting them into categories: urgent, manageable, and pray I win the lottery. The last pile was the largest, but I didn't let it crush me. Not yet. Later that morning, I sat on the couch with my son, his small body curled against mine as he watched cartoons. The noise filled the room, but my mind kept drifting back to the figure, the orb of light, and its promise of strength. Had it really happened? Or was I just clinging to some elaborate hallucination to avoid the harsh truth of my reality? The knock at the door jolted me out of my thoughts. It was sharp, deliberate, the kind of knock that carried purpose. I frowned, untangling myself from my son and heading to the door. When I opened it, I was met with a man in a gray uniform holding a clipboard. His expression was professional but sympathetic. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to ask who he was or why he was here. "Ms. Davis?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tightening. "That's me. I'm with City Utilities. I'm afraid we have to shut off your power today." "I'm sorry, but..." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I know. I haven't been able to make the payments." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "There's still time to make arrangements if you can come up with even a partial payment. Otherwise, the disconnection will proceed by noon." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Thanks," I said, my voice hollow. "I'll figure something out." He nodded and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with the weight of reality pressing down on me again. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. This was it, the breaking point I'd been teetering on for weeks. I had less than 3 hours to come up with money I didn't have, and no amount of optimism or strange glowing figures could change that. Unless, I shook my head, the absurdity of the thought making me laugh bitterly. "You're really losing it," I muttered to myself. But even as I tried to dismiss it, I felt a tug in my chest, a pull towards something I couldn't explain. I thought of the figure's words, its promise that I had strength I didn't know about. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door, sitting cross-legged on the floor. The air felt still, heavy with expectation, though I didn't know if it was real or my imagination. I closed my eyes and whispered, "If you're real, if this wasn't just in my head, I need help." The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I almost laughed at myself for even trying, but then the air shifted. It was subtle at first, a faint hum, like the distant buzz of electricity. The scent of lavender and that strange metallic tang filled the room. And when I opened my eyes, the figure was there. It stood in the same corner as before, its form shimmering and radiant. This time, I didn't feel fear, only awe. "You called," it said, its voice calm and resonant. Again, I didn't bother asking if it was real. Instead, I asked the question that burned in my chest. "Why did you come to me?" The figure stepped closer, its light pulsing softly. "Because you are ready." "Ready for what?" My voice cracked. "I'm about to lose everything. How am I supposed to fix this?" "You have strength within you," it said. "But strength alone is not enough. You must have clarity, focus, the power to act." I clenched my fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I need more than strength. I need money, food, a way to keep the lights on. And you will find a way," it replied. "But only if you believe in your ability to rise." Its words made me want to scream. They sounded like the kind of vague platitudes people offer when they don't know how to help. But then, it raised its hand again, and in its palm was the orb of light. "This is a gift," it said, "a spark to ignite what lies dormant." I hesitated, the memory of last night rushing back. The rush of energy, the feeling of being alive, even if only for a moment. "What's the price?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "There is always a price," it said, "but it is one you will not regret if you use this gift wisely." Its words sent a chill down my spine. "I don't understand." "You will," it said simply. "But the choice is yours." I stared at the orb, its light swirling with colors I couldn't name. Fear and curiosity warred within me. I didn't know what would happen if I accepted it, but I knew what would happen if I didn't. My life would continue on the same downward spiral, dragging me deeper into despair. Slowly, I reached out. The moment my fingers touched the orb, a surge of energy coursed through me, stronger than anything I'd ever felt. It was like being struck by lightning, but instead of pain, there was warmth, clarity, purpose. My mind felt sharp, my body alive with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The figure stepped back, its form glowing brighter for a moment. "Use it well," it said. "And remember, you are not alone." And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving me alone in the stillness of my room. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't know what the price would be or how I would face the challenges ahead, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. When I woke up the next morning, the world felt sharper. The dull haze that had hung over me for so long, clouding my thoughts and making everything feel impossibly heavy, had lifted. It wasn't completely gone. I still felt the weight of my struggles pressing against me, but it no longer crushed me. I could breathe again. I got out of bed and stretched, testing this new feeling, half convinced it would vanish like the last traces of a dream. But it didn't. My body felt lighter, my mind clearer. The heaviness in my chest was replaced by something else, resolve. I didn't fully understand what had happened the night before, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Whatever that figure had done, it had shifted something inside me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt capable of taking action instead of being paralyzed by fear. The first test came almost immediately. My son, Luke, was already awake when I walked into the kitchen. He was sitting at the table, his favorite blue crayon in hand, scribbling something on a piece of paper. He looked up as I entered, his big brown eyes lighting up. "Morning, Mommy," he chirped. "Morning, sweetheart." I kissed the top of his head and glanced at his drawing. It was a colorful mess of stick figures and squiggly lines, but I could tell he'd worked hard on it. "What's this?" "It's us," he said proudly, pointing to the stick figures. "That's you, and that's me. And we're flying." "Flying up?" I smiled, though my chest ached a little. Luke always seemed to know when I needed a reminder of something impossible. Something hopeful. "I love it. Can I keep it?" "Yeah," he said, beaming. "You can put it on the fridge." I ruffled his hair, then turned to the fridge. My heart sank as I opened it and saw how bare it was. Half a carton of milk, a few eggs, and some wilted lettuce. Not exactly a feast, but instead of letting the dread take over, I forced myself to think. I could stretch what we had for today. Maybe pancakes for breakfast, scrambled eggs for lunch. Dinner would be trickier, but I'd figure it out. The thought didn't feel as overwhelming as it usually did. I could handle this. After breakfast, I sat down at the kitchen table with a stack of bills I'd sorted the day before. Normally, just looking at them would send me spiraling into a pit of anxiety. But today, I approached them differently. I made a list of priorities: rent, utilities, groceries. Everything else could wait. I didn't have enough to cover it all, but I could call the electric company and negotiate an extension. Maybe I could pick up some extra hours at work or sell a few things I didn't need anymore. I didn't know if it would be enough, but at least I had a plan. The act of writing it all down made me feel like I was taking control. Even if just a little, it was a small step, but it was more than I'd managed in weeks. By the afternoon, I felt like I was hitting my stride. I had called the electric company and convinced them to give me another week before shutting off the power. It wasn't a long-term solution, but it bought me time. I even managed to sort through a box of old clothes and toys, setting aside things I could sell or donate. It was small progress, but it felt good to do something instead of drowning in the endless cycle of worry. But then, something strange happened. I was in the middle of folding a stack of Luke's outgrown shirts when it hit me. A sudden, overwhelming feeling of being somewhere else. The air around me seemed to shift, the room tilting slightly as if I were on the deck of a rocking boat. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. And then I saw it. It wasn't a dream or a memory. It was like watching a scene play out in real time. A man stood at the corner of a busy street, staring at his phone. He looked distracted, completely unaware of the car speeding toward the intersection. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized what was about to happen. "No!" I gasped, reaching out instinctively, as if I could pull him back. But the vision disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving me breathless and disoriented. I sat there for a moment, my hands shaking. What the hell was that? A hallucination? A warning? The memory of the glowing figure and its cryptic words came rushing back. The strength to act. The clarity to see. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew where that man was. I could picture the intersection clearly, even though I'd never been there before. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was supposed to do something about it. I glanced at the clock. Luke was napping, and the babysitter I'd called earlier was due to arrive any minute. I grabbed my keys and hurried out the door, my heart pounding. The intersection was only a few blocks away, but I ran the whole way, my breath coming in ragged gasps by the time I reached it. The scene was exactly as I'd seen it in my vision. The man stood at the corner, his head bent over his phone, completely oblivious to the car barreling toward the red light. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice breaking through the noise of the city. The man looked up, startled, just as the car sped past, missing him by inches. His face went pale as he stumbled backward onto the sidewalk. "Oh my God," he muttered, his eyes wide as he looked at me. "How did you—" I didn't have an answer. My legs felt like jelly, and my heart was racing so fast it hurt. I shook my head, unable to find the words. "Just be careful," I managed to say before turning and walking away. By the time I got home, the babysitter was sitting on the couch, flipping through her phone. She looked up as I came in, her expression curious. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just needed some fresh air." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press. I paid her and saw her out, then sat on the couch, my head spinning. What had just happened? That vision, the man, the car, it wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. But what did it mean? And why had it happened to me? I thought of the glowing figure again, its cryptic promises and the strange gift it had given me, the strength to act. I didn't know if I was ready for whatever this was, but one thing was clear. My life wasn't just about survival anymore. Something bigger was happening, and whether I liked it or not, I was part of it. For the first time, I felt something stir inside me. Not fear, not dread, but something stronger. Purpose. The visions didn't stop. The next one came 2 days later, while I was making dinner. Luke was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring another masterpiece as I stirred a pot of soup on the stove. Everything felt almost normal, the routine of our evening grounding me after the whirlwind of emotions from the last few days. But then, just as I reached for the salt, the world shifted again. It wasn't gradual. One moment, I was standing in my cramped kitchen, the smell of onions and garlic filling the air. The next, I was somewhere else. The air was heavy, the faint sound of water splashing reaching my ears. My vision blurred and refocused, and I found myself looking at a backyard pool. A little girl was there, no older than 3 or 4. She was reaching for a ball that floated just out of her grasp. My stomach tightened. I tried to move, to shout, to do something, but I was stuck, a silent observer to what was about to happen. The ball drifted farther away, and she stepped closer to the edge, her tiny feet slipping on the wet tile. The moment her body tipped forward, I gasped and was pulled back into my kitchen. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the counter to steady myself, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Mommy!" Luke's voice cut through the haze, full of concern. "Are you okay?" I turned to him, forcing a shaky smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little dizzy." But I wasn't fine. I knew exactly where that pool was. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. It was only a few blocks away, tucked behind a house I'd passed countless times on walks with Luke. And that little girl, she was in danger. "I'll be right back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I grabbed my keys. Luke looked up, confused. "Where are you going?" "I won't be long," I promised. "Just stay here and keep coloring, okay?" I ran out the door before he could ask any more questions. By the time I reached the house, my legs felt like jelly. I slipped through the side gate without thinking, driven by an urgency I couldn't ignore. The backyard was just as I'd seen it in the vision. The pool, the ball, and a little girl teetering dangerously close to the edge. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice sharp and loud. The girl froze, turning to look at me with wide, startled eyes. Her mother came rushing out of the house a moment later, her face a mix of confusion and panic. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, pulling the little girl away from the edge and clutching her protectively. I was just walking by and heard her. I lied, my breath coming in ragged gasps. She was about to fall in. The woman's eyes narrowed, but then she looked at her daughter and seemed to realize how close she'd come to disaster. "Thank you," she said, her voice softening. "I don't know how I didn't see." I nodded, unable to find the right words. My chest felt tight, not from exertion but from the weight of what had just happened. I had stopped something terrible, but the cost was starting to show. When I got back home, Luke was waiting for me by the door, his face scrunched up in a frown. "Where'd you go, Mommy?" I knelt down and pulled him into a hug, holding him tighter than I should have. "I just had to help someone, sweetheart. That's all." "Are you a superhero now?" he asked, pulling back to look at me. I laughed, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Something like that." He didn't press further, thankfully, but as I tucked him into bed that night, the weight of everything pressed down on me like a storm cloud. These visions, they weren't just random. They were a responsibility, one I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. But they were also taking a toll. The next day, I felt it more clearly. My body ached in ways it shouldn't have. My hands trembled when I tried to hold a pen, and my head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain that no amount of water or rest could fix. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Every time I acted on a vision, it took something from me. Energy, strength, something. And I didn't know how much I could give before there was nothing left. The figure's words came back to me. There is always a price. What exactly was I paying? And how much more was it going to cost me? The third vision came a week later, and it was worse than the first two. This time, I saw a woman in a crowded coffee shop. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, her hand clutching her chest as she stumbled toward the counter. No one noticed. No one helped. She was on the verge of collapse, and I could feel her fear, her pain, as if it were my own. When the vision ended, I was left gasping for air, my chest tight and my head spinning. I didn't even take the time to think. I grabbed my bag and left Luke with a neighbor, running toward the coffee shop as fast as my legs could carry me. By the time I arrived, the woman was already on the ground, her breathing shallow and labored. A crowd had gathered, but no one seemed to know what to do. "Call 911," I shouted, dropping to my knees beside her. "She needs help." A man fumbled with his phone, and I did my best to keep the woman conscious, talking to her, holding her hand, willing her to stay with me. When the paramedics arrived, they thanked me, saying my quick actions might have saved her life. But as I stood there, watching them load her into the ambulance, I felt the cost again. My vision blurred, my legs wobbled, and a wave of exhaustion swept over me so suddenly that I had to sit down on the curb. That night, as I lay in bed, every muscle in my body screamed in protest. My head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, and my chest ached with every breath. I couldn't keep going like this. I knew it, but how could I stop? The figure's promise echoed in my mind. "You will not regret the price if you use this gift wisely." I wanted to believe that, but as I stared at the ceiling, tears slipping down my cheeks, I couldn't help but wonder, how much more could I give before there was nothing left of me? The next morning, I woke up feeling like a shell of myself. But as I looked at Luke sitting at the table with his crayons and his endless optimism, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever this gift was, whatever the price, I wasn't giving up. Not yet. I didn't ask for this. That thought consumed me as I stood in front of the mirror the next morning, staring at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, dark circles smudged under them like bruises from a fight I didn't know I'd signed up for. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the sink. Every bone in my body ached, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that no amount of sleep could shake. The visions were wearing me down, draining me in ways I didn't fully understand. Every time I acted, it felt like something was taken from me, a piece of my strength, my energy, my very soul. And yet, I couldn't stop, because people were alive today who wouldn't be if I hadn't acted. That truth weighed on me just as heavily as the cost. Luke bounded into the room, oblivious to my inner turmoil. His tiny hands clutched a drawing, another one of his colorful masterpieces. "Mommy, look, I made a picture of us again." I forced a smile as he held it up. Two stick figures, me and him, standing in front of a house. But this time, there was something else. A third figure glowing, hovering above us. "What's this?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. "It's the light," he said simply, as if it were obvious. "The one that makes you strong." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He shrugged, his little face serious. "I see it sometimes. Around you. It makes you glow." My breath caught in my throat. How could he know? How could he possibly see what was happening to me when I didn't fully understand it myself? I knelt down and pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "You're very special. You know that?" I whispered. "You're special too," he replied, his voice muffled against my shoulder. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. My thoughts were tangled, my emotions a whirlwind of fear, exhaustion, and a growing sense of responsibility. I needed answers, real answers, but I didn't know where to start. The figure's words kept echoing in my mind. "You will not regret the price if you use this gift wisely." What did that mean? What was I supposed to do? Was there some larger purpose I was meant to fulfill? Or was this just some cruel twist of fate? The questions gnawed at me, but no answers came. And then, as if summoned by my frustration, the air in the room shifted. The now familiar scent of lavender and that metallic tang filled the air, and the temperature dropped slightly. I didn't even flinch this time. When the light began to ripple in the corner of the room, I turned to face it, my arms crossed over my chest. "You again," I said, my voice tinged with bitterness. "Are you here to explain, or just to watch me fall apart?" The figure stepped forward, its form as luminous and undefined as ever. "You are not falling apart," it said. "You are transforming." Transforming? I laughed bitterly. "It feels more like dying. Growth often feels that way," it replied calmly. "But you are not dying. You are awakening." Awakening to what? I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "I'm exhausted. I'm hurting. Every time I help someone, it feels like I'm giving up a piece of myself. I can't keep doing this." The figure tilted its head, its light dimming slightly. "You are correct," it said. "You cannot bear this burden alone forever." "Then why give it to me in the first place?" I demanded. "Why me? Why now?" It stepped closer, its voice softening. "Because you called, and because you are stronger than you believe." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I don't feel strong. I feel broken." "You feel the weight of the world," it said, "because you care. That is your strength, even when it feels like a weakness." I stared at it, my chest tightening. What's the point of all this? Why give me this gift if it's just going to destroy me? The figure paused, its light flickering as if it were considering my question. "This gift was not given lightly," it said. "It was entrusted to you because you have the heart to wield it. But you are correct. There is a cost. One that grows heavier with time." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "What happens when I can't bear it anymore?" "When the time comes, you will pass the gift on," it said simply, "to someone else who is ready." The weight of its words settled over me like a blanket. This wasn't forever. I wouldn't have to carry this burden for the rest of my life. But that didn't make it any easier now. "How will I know when it's time?" I asked. "You will know," it said. "And until then, you will continue to grow, to learn, to give. You are not alone in this, even when it feels that way." I wanted to believe it, but doubt still lingered in the back of my mind. "Why can't you just take it back? Fix things yourself." The figure's light pulsed faintly, as if in response to my question. "Because this world belongs to you," it said. "To humanity. The power to change, it must come from within." Its words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about me. It was about something bigger, something I was only beginning to understand. The figure faded after that, leaving me alone in the stillness of the kitchen. But its words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as I went about the rest of my day. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything I'd been through. The visions, the people I'd saved, the toll it had taken on me. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't easy, but it wasn't meaningless either. I thought of the man at the street corner, the little girl by the pool, the woman in the coffee shop. They were alive because of me, because of this gift. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make the cost worth it. For now, at least. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. The exhaustion was still there, the weight of the gift still heavy on my shoulders, but I didn't feel as overwhelmed by it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was doing, and that was something. As I made breakfast for Luke, he looked up at me with a curious expression. Mommy, yes, sweetheart, do you think we're superheroes? I smiled, ruffling his hair. Why do you ask? Because you always help people, he said simply. And superheroes help people. I swallowed the lump in my throat and knelt down to his level. I think, I said slowly, that sometimes we all have a little bit of superhero in us. Even you, even me? His eyes lit up. Especially you, I said, pulling him into a hug. As I held him, I felt the weight in my chest lighten, just a little. I didn't know what the future held, or how much more this gift would ask of me. But for now, I had my son, my purpose, and the faintest flicker of hope. And that was enough. For now.